Hello, and welcome to this mentoring webinar. I'm Lizzie Benedikz at the Academy of Medical Sciences, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Firstly, just to let you know that you don't need to worry about switching on your microphone during this webinar, but you can ask questions at any time by typing them in the question box, which we'll be monitoring and reading out, so they will be kept anonymous, and we'd love to hear from you. I'm now going to introduce our expert mentoring facilitator, Alexis Hutson, who will guide you through this topic.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Lizzie. It's Alexis speaking now. So you'll be with me for the next 45 minutes just to talk you through the mentoring conversation and your part in it. So very welcome to this webinar. Just so you know a little bit about me, I'm the scheme trainer for the Academy of Medical Sciences, and I work exclusively with doctors and as an independent coach and mentor. I've been doing that for a number of years now, and I split my time evenly between working with individuals on a one-to-one basis and working with groups and teams. I've supported lots of organisations over the years with their mentoring schemes, and equally I worked in the NHS for 9 years, so I've got lots of experience and ideas and opinions about what mentoring is, what it isn't, and just how powerful it can be for people in terms of the benefits that it can give. So what I'd like to do is just kick us off with a little bit of interaction. I'd really love to hear from people, whether you're attending this webinar with your mindset as a mentor or as a mentee. It'd be really nice to hear, just if you type into the questions box, whether you're a mentor or a mentee in terms of how you're listening to the information with regards to this webinar and the context. So thank you very much. We've got some mentees coming in on the scoreboards. All mentees so far. Any mentors, or are you all mentees? It's fine if you are. Okay, thank you. Somebody also does some mentoring as well, so a bit of both. That's good. Excellent. Okay, so that gives me something to go on in terms of how we frame this conversation and how I deliver some of the materials to you. So the purpose of this session is to give you a little bit of a review of the developmental model of mentoring, which is what we do at the Academy, and that might feel and look quite different to more traditional structured models of mentoring. We'll talk about that in a minute. I also want to talk about the structure of a really productive conversation, the actual mentoring conversation itself, your part in that, so thinking about that in terms of your own role and responsibilities as a mentee. Talk a bit about the Oscar model, which is something that we help people use at the Academy, and it's a way of framing and organising questions within the mentoring conversation. And also, you know, if you want to share your experiences and learning with us and other attendees this morning, that makes it much more rich for us, and we'd love to hear from you. So that's the purpose of the session. So, developmental mentoring. For those of you who don't already know, this is quite different to what we would traditionally call a structured model of mentoring. And the emphasis is it's really about getting the best out of people. It's about drawing learning out of the learner, the mentee, rather than simply trying to push information in. So it's that self-discovery, that exploration, and that really thinking through things for yourself as a mentee, rather than simply seeking the answers from your mentee or from your mentor rather, or from your supervisor or colleagues. So it's got a different emphasis towards it. And also I'd like to just differentiate between coaching and mentoring as well, because they're interchangeable terms that we use quite a lot when we're talking about this kind of one-to-one developmental framework. So just to remind ourselves that coaching is usually much more short-term and is much more focused on skills and behaviours and competencies and tasks, you know, trying to get that next job, or trying to improve interview skills, or you know, delivery skills for public speaking. Whereas mentoring is much more likely to be longer term and is much more concerned with building capability and helping the learner to discover wisdom for themselves. So it's broadening of perspectives and horizons. But where they overlap with each other is this whole piece about, it's about supporting one person to get the very best from themselves, and doing that through questions, review, respect, support, listening, reflections, and a trustful relationship. So I thought that would be useful just to define the difference between those two things for you at this point. So the structured model of mentoring, and this is something that often people are more used to because it has a hierarchical nature to it, and it's often used actually within the healthcare setting as a kind of supervisory, education supervisor, clinical supervisor type role, where there's, you know, people are seen as sort of passing on information, if you like. But often it's seen as a kind of a patronage or protege model, and that's quite an old-fashioned word to use, but you know, it can be seen as that there, where you know, sometimes gifting of opportunities and advice is a part of the relationship. And if it is done in a kind of ad hoc way, then you know, tends to be the relationships are set up because people like each other and they can see something in the person that they want to bring on as a mentor, or it's about the organisation needs. So that's a very sort of structured, traditional model of mentoring, which I'm not necessarily critical of, but with regards to what we do at the Academy and our mentoring scheme, and what we like to promote with these sessions, the webinars and our training, is this, developmental mentoring. And this has a much more greater emphasis on encouraging the mentee to do things for herself or himself. And it's about encouraging that autonomy and self-development. There is value and a mutuality of learning for both parties. Both the mentor and the mentee are learning throughout this relationship. But the mentee is very much in the driving seat here. They're the ones with the people on the steering wheel. They are setting direction, and they're in control of this piece of learning and develop for themselves. And it's usually better to not have a line of accountability in there, because it's about experience and it's about non-judgmental, independent, unbiased thinking and ideas that can be generated through this conversation. So that's the difference. And sometimes it can feel quite different when you're in a developmental mentoring conversation to when you're in a structured mentoring conversation. So I'm going to launch a little poll now that we've talked about the difference between structured and developmental mentoring. And this is popping up now, hopefully for you. So, quick poll, are you already in a developmental mentoring relationship? So if you could select one of the following: yep, you're in a formal scheme, that's what it feels like. But yes, you feel that you are informally in a developmental mentoring relationship. No, you're not in one, you're in a structured model already, or no, not at all, not in any kind of scheme at all. So just really interested to hear whether you're already in a developmental mentoring relationship. Yes, it's part of the scheme, part of perhaps your university. Yes, it's informally, but it feels very developmental. No, you're in the structured model, or no, nothing at all. So, yeah, we've got those coming in now. So, yes, it's happening informally for most people. We've got a quarter of you that it's in a formal scheme already, and of course that might be with us in the Academy. You know, 13% of you are no, not at all. But 63% of you are yes, you're informally having developmental mentoring. So that's really good to know, because it's good to know that it's part of the culture of what people are doing, how they see development, how people like to bring others on. It's nice to know that that part of people's professional lives is being catered to. But equally, is it being done well? Are you getting the most out of it? Is it something that you feel as though you're getting the most out of you in that conversation? So that's something that I think is worth us thinking about. And just so that you're aware, you know, the benefits for you as the mentee, well, that might seem obvious because you're in a safe haven that's exploring your professional development and work-based issues, and that's different to be able to talk to colleagues or family or friends about it. But equally for the mentor, it's a great opportunity to develop skills in developing others. And we always hear back from our mentors who say that they really, really value that it feels different working with somebody outside of their organisation as a mentor. And equally, you know, the organisation gets a lot out of it because, you know, it's been proved to help with retention and attraction of people into the organisation, which is why mentoring schemes are, you know, a part of Athena Swan and other kind of structures and measurements that organisations are adhering to these days. So everyone's a winner. So the benefits of mentoring then. Great mentors provide a stimulating sanctuary in which people can take a helicopter view of their options. That's Mike Pegg, who's written a number of books on mentoring. So just in the question box, I'd really like to hear what words in that sentence really appeal to you? What jump out at you? Give me some feedback here, chaps, on which words really appeal to you in that sentence. Great mentors provide a stimulating sanctuary in which people can take a helicopter view of their options. Stimulating, thank you. Yes, helicopter view, absolutely. And stimulating for me is, you know, particularly important because this is not a nice chat in the sense that it's comfortable and sort of easy. It should be stimulating and challenging safely and exciting and energizing. And yes, somebody else has said helicopter view, absolutely. Getting that perspective and that seeing things through a different lens is incredibly valuable for people. People often say sanctuary as well because that implies this safe space that feels different and feels that, you know, information will be treated privately and confidentially. That's also important. And also I think options, but crucially their options is a really important part of this sentence because the implication is that there are always different options that you might not have seen yet. So yeah, a nice sentence to have in our heads when we're thinking about the benefits of mentoring and what it can mean for us. So let's get on now to the structure of the conversation, the mentoring conversation and your part in it. That's what this webinar is all about. So this is from David Clutterbuck, the 7 coaching or mentoring conversations. And what he observed is that there are these 7 different aspects to the conversation that happen before and after the actual spoken dialogue of the conversation itself. So number 1 is, well, my dialogue that I have with myself before the session as the mentor. So what am I thinking about? You know, how did it go last time? What might have happened? What progress could they have made? The client or the mentees in a conversation before the session. Ooh, have I done all the things I said I was going to do? Am I quite excited to let my mentor know what's happened? And then there's my inner dialogue during the conversation as the mentor. You know, do they seem really sure about what they're doing here, or they feel really excited about this, or wow, they have made really a lot of progress. We've got the actual spoken dialogue, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then post-conversation, there's the mentees in a dialogue during the conversation. So am I willing to say everything that I need to say during the conversation? And then everybody's reflections after it. How did it go? Did I get the most out of it? Did I say everything I needed to say? So I think that's useful for us always to know that there are these other conversations that are happening in and around the actual spoken dialogue. But what we're going to talk about here is the actual spoken dialogue, the actual conversation itself, and getting the most out of that. So what does that mentoring conversation involve? Well, yes, we know it's a one-to-one conversation, and we know that for sure it's characterised by confidentiality. You know, neither party, neither the mentor nor the mentee, can truly be honest and talk about everything that they need to talk about and share experiences if they think that the information is going to be passed on in some shape or form. So that privacy and respect of the information from both parties is crucial. But equally, appreciation and attention, the appreciation of what each other is talking about and the attention to the business at hand. You know, what are we talking about here? What do we appreciate about it? What's really going on are crucial in terms of making sure that it's purposeful and focused as a conversation. Ease, space to think. Well, the pace and the intensity by which most people are working these days means that most of our conversations are rushed and hurried, and we don't really have time to think. Usually it's just a kind of, can I get the information out as quickly as possible before I need to move on to my next task? Well, this conversation shouldn't have that urgency to it. It should have that sense of ease, that you can just sit back and think things through. Also, empathy, sympathy, that empathetic approach to seeking to understand and putting yourself in the other person's shoes, because all of these things build up to trust. The trust that we have with each other in having that conversation, and that's the platform by which we stand on in order to build a good, robust relationship that works well for both parties. And largely, mostly, all of those things are done through listening, really good listening skills. And I mean that from both the mentor and the mentee's perspective. The trouble is, for most of us, when we're listening in our normal day-to-day lives, we assume we know what the other person is going to say next. You know, we're racing ahead in our head. Yeah, I know where she's going with this, or I know what he's going to say about this. So actually, we stop listening because we've made that assumption, and now I'm just waiting for my turn to speak because I think I know what you're going to say about this. And so if you don't pause while I'm waiting for my turn to speak, then I might as well just interrupt because I have a sense of urgency about getting out what I want to say. Because ultimately, I'm assuming the reason you're telling me this is that you want my advice and you want me to impart my knowledge. And I think that this sort of little scenario, if you like, is what often happens when we're listening to each other and when we're actually talking with each other. We have an expectation of what the conversation is going to be about and what it's going to be like, which can be unhelpful. And applying this approach to a mentoring conversation is very unhelpful for both the mentor and the mentee. So a way of thinking about this and the difference between a mentoring conversation and one of our more regular conversations, if you like, is that for most of us, we spend proportionately a larger amount of time doing this left-hand column, which is what we call diagnostic listening. And I don't mean in a clinical sense, it's just the term we use for diagnostic listening. So what we tend to do is we listen to the facts, you know, what is she telling me here? And then we start to select those facts and filter them down, because actually what I'm doing here is I'm just sorting out what I think is the problem. I'm sorting out what's relevant, irrelevant, and therefore I'm just waiting to craft my response to this because I'm listening to those kinds of facts. Whereas actually, in an active listening or a mentoring conversation, we need to be listening to the whole person and actively attending to all dynamics, all elements within the conversation. So we're really seeking to hear everything that's going on and reflecting back what is being said, so that when I do respond as a mentor, then I'm doing it with a greater degree of insight and a greater degree of potential understanding and awareness about everything that's going on. Because ultimately, an active listening approach is much more about exploring and finding out more and being open to that investigation, rather than shutting down the conversation and getting to the point as quickly as possible. So I hope that gives you a kind of an overview of why the listening would feel different in a mentoring conversation, whether you be a mentor or a mentee. So how does the mentoring conversation work? Well, this is a diagram that I've created through running these sessions over a number of years now. And I think it's a useful way of describing visually the proportion of time that I think people need to spend in terms of the exploration of ideas, the crafting of questions, the investigation into ideas and behaviours and patterns that are happening for people. And proportionally, I think that exploration piece should be much bigger than our action planning or our getting to the point as quickly as possible. Because if we do that well, if we really truly explore all of our thinking and all of our options, then we're much more likely to get to new understanding or new ideas. And then actually the action planning is relatively straightforward and is a relatively small part of the conversation, because actually we're getting to the right kind of action planning because we've taken the time, we've invested in that really high quality exploration. And the problem is for most of us, because we are constrained by time, is we don't spend enough time in exploration and we just rush forward and try to get to action planning too quickly. Too quickly do we say, so right, what are we going to do about this? So what are your next steps? And actually being a bit patient about that process can be really important and can then get much more potential new thinking out of that process. So now I'd like to move on to the Oscar model, which is a really nice 5-step framework for questions that can be used during the mentoring session to help you structure the conversation and to help it have purpose and focus. Now this is a really nice way of thinking about how you craft your questions to yourself or to your mentee or whoever you're working with, as a way of giving yourself a little bit of methodology behind what you're doing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about these 5 steps now with a particular emphasis on your role as either a mentor or mentee. So let's move through this material then. So stage 1 and stage 2. So stage 1 is about focusing on the outcome. Where do you want to be? What's the point of this mentoring piece of development that you're doing, or what's the outcome that you need for this conversation? And on the right hand side you've got some questions there. What do you want to achieve? How will you know when you've achieved it? What does success look like for you? So they're the kind of questions that may well be very familiar to you because they're often used in our sort of professional language now. But it's really important to spend time doing that really well and to not just, I suppose, accept the first answer that you think you might have. This is all part of the exploration phase. So what I would say is, for the mentors, your role in stage 1 is to really help the mentee shape and define the purpose of this mentoring, and checking that their outcome is absolutely accurate, is based on reality and has real purpose and focus to it. Because sometimes what people think they want to get out of mentoring actually can evolve and can be much more emergent and less structured than they think it is when they first start having that conversation. So your role as a mentor is to really unpack that destination, that outcome, and really analyse it with your person thoroughly. And for you as a mentee, your role in stage 1 is to be really open and honest and open-minded about what your goal could be. So in order to accurately assess what that goal of objective or objective is, you really need to explore it. Don't think that it's, it's already beautifully crafted and finite. Make sure that you've really stretched your thinking with that stage 1 piece. And again, that's quite a big proportionally piece of work to do. You know, these stages don't have equal amounts of time associated with them necessarily. Different people will need different amounts of time in these different stages. So stage 2, the situation. So where are you now? What does the current situation look like? You know, what are all the contributing factors, and how might you be contributing to this situation? So this is about exploring the here and now. And for the mentor, your role in this particular stage 2 is to help the mentee fully explore where they are now and support them to think about the patterns, the behaviours, the context that they're currently experiencing, and relate that back to how different it is to, you know, the stage 1 and the destination that they're aiming for. So to really make that stretch across stage 1 and stage 2. So the mentors, that's your role, to really help the mentee fully explore where they are now and what it's looking like for them. And for the mentee, your role in stage 2 is to try not to get too distracted by the detail and the complexity of your current context. Try not to jump down too many rabbit holes. You know, see if you can take that helicopter view and stand back and have a bird's eye view of your current situation. That can give you really important clues about what's happening for you at the moment. So stage 3, choices and consequences. So, you know, this is about really exploring your options. What could you do? What are the consequences? What are the repercussions? You know, the pros and cons of all of this. So this is a bit of analysis stuff, which is really important. And again, for the mentor, you need to help your mentee stretch their thinking around the issue and the ideas, and help them see it from all angles. You know, really help people to consider what their options are, because there are always more options. Even though some of these might be quite extreme or wild or crazy options, it's always worth, you know, just putting them on the table and seeing what they look like. They might not be as crazy as you see. And for the mentee, your role in stage 3 is to be prepared to explore as many options as possible and analyse them thoroughly. And, you know, be honest about what all of those choices and consequences are, you know. And it might not just be the professional choices and consequences. There might be impacts on your home life or family or whatever, and you need to be honest about all of those different elements in there. Stage 4, so, you know, your actions. So what's the plan here? What are you going to do next? How motivated are you? You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much energy have you got towards this detailed plan as it starts to emerge once you've gone through stages 1 through 3. Now for the mentor here, it's worth you reflecting on the style or the attributes of the mentee that you're working with here. So are they the kind of person who is naturally really well organised, quite planful, systematic, methodical in their style? Now, if they are like that, then actually they might not need much help with the detailed plan. That might be happening naturally. But equally, it might be useful for you to stretch them as a mentor and to say, well, what's going to happen if the plan doesn't happen? What happens if there's a piece of change that's unanticipated happens? You know, how flexible is this plan? So, you know, stretch them in an opposite direction to where their natural preferences might lie. And equally, you might be working with a mentee who has a much more casual, flexible, emergent style around how they organise themselves with regards to their work. So you might need to help them be a bit more structured and methodical and hold them to account with that to help them become a bit more secure and detailed in their plans and the next steps. And for you, the mentees, you know, your role in stage 4 is to be really realistic about, you know, the time you have and how willing you are to challenge yourself. to really think about your skills and preferences and how they're going to play out with these actions. You know, be honest with yourself, be honest with your mentor. And then the final stage, stage 5, is making sure you're on track, reviewing, measuring, understanding what's happening here. And so, you know, the progress that you make, not only in the conversation, but for the mentees between the mentoring conversations, is crucial to actually putting your learning into action. So for the mentee, so for the mentor, your role in stage 5 is to really help them stay on track and help them understand what staying on track looks like for them. And again, this to some degree is about their own personality preferences and how that might look for them. Some people might need to do little lists or checking off on a weekly basis. Other people might have much more grander, broader ways that they want to measure their progress in terms of how they're feeling or feedback that they might get off colleagues. So, you know, exploring that and discovering how your mentee will monitor their own progress is really important. And for the mentee, you know, again, be honest about how you'll measure your progress and reflect on your learning. Different people have different learning styles, so we'll need to do this that is in a meaningful way for them. And it's important to have that conversation and to work with people to help people realise what works best for them. That's the great thing about coaching and mentoring. It's tailor-made for you. It's bespoke in that respect. So hopefully that's given you a richer sort of idea about the Oscar model and the 5-stage review. And we do have a nice little downloadable leaflet from the website with that on, so you can have a look at that, and that might be just a nice little reminder for you, whether you be a mentor or mentee, about those questions and how you could structure that conversation. So just to position the Oscar model within that framework of exploration, new understanding and action planning, for me, Oscar stages 1, 2 and 3 largely cover exploration and sort of half of new understanding. And then Oscar stages 4 and 5 are more concerned with this action planning and beyond, and then of course looping back round as you would do in terms of how you review your learning and you come back into exploration again. So that's just positioning that for you with regards to my other framework. A couple of things for the mentors, or those of you who are doing a bit of mentoring as well as being a mentee. It's a nice reminder about some of the effective and ineffective behaviours with regards to attention, and we'll see on the next slide, intention. So your attention, what are you focused on? What are you focused on? So, you know, you can think about this as a mentee as well, but I wrote this slide with reference to the mentors. So your attention, you know, a good example is being really clear and focused on the thinker, the mentee, and being present in the moment. And having that space in your mind to be able to do that and to really pay attention for that active listening piece is really important in helping the mentee do the very best thinking for themselves. And a poor example is if you're very scattered, if you're drifting off and you're not present in the moment. So it can be hard work having that kind of focus and paying that kind of attention to another person for maybe an hour, if that's how long the conversation is. But it's a really important part of the role for the mentor. And then this next slide is about effective, ineffective behaviours with regards to your intention as a mentor. You know, ideally it's positive and constructive. So you want to understand the mentee. You're not making these assumptions. You're really appreciating the quality of the relationship and the information that's being shared with you. But a poor example of ineffective behaviours with regards to your intention is you needing to appear to be knowledgeable. You know, I'm very senior. I want to fix this. I want to help the mentee see things my way, you know, and that's really unhelpful. That's veering back in the direction of a very structured model of mentoring, which is not what we're talking about here. So useful sort of to think about those two clear things. And I would argue that that's true for both mentees as well as mentees, mentors rather. Where is your attention and what is your intention? Reflect on those. Now, the quality of the relationship between the mentor and the mentee is the thing that will characterise how successful it is. Some research done at Asbridge Business School a couple of years ago now did a global piece of research to really find out what was the factor that really influenced how successful coaching or mentoring could be. And it wasn't about how trained or skilled the mentors, it wasn't about how beautifully matched the mentor and mentee were in terms of specialist knowledge. None of those things were as important as the actual quality of the relationship. So how well you get on is really important. So taking the time to make sure that you invest in building rapport and making sure everybody's expectations are on track and you've got a reasonable connection and commitment to this piece of work together and doing what you say you're going to do, that's what's going to be really important and effective in terms of how successful this relationship is going to be. It's that quality of the relationship. Never forget that. So just to finish off that piece about, you know, so whose responsibility is what then? So for the mentor, it's your responsibility to make sure that what happens within the mentoring conversation is constructive, is positive, and is focused. It's your job to make sure that that person is doing the very best thinking for themselves and is walking away from that conversation feeling energized and positive about what they're going to do next. The mentee, it's your responsibility to then do something about it between sessions. That's when the learning really, really happens. It's when things are put into action and you really start to notice your progress and make things, you know, instigate change and make progress. A couple of slides now about the role of the mentor. So, you know, the role of the mentor could be any one of these bullet points: the sounding board, the career counsellor, the critical friend. Any of these things are valid roles of mentors, and any one of them could be more or less comfortable to you if you're a mentor. As a mentee, you could look at that list and say, well, actually, I really need a career counsellor, or I don't need a sounding board, or vice versa. You know, I really need a critical friend, but somebody who's unbiased about my current position. So really thinking about what you're willing to give as a mentor from this list and what you really need as a mentee from this list would be really useful in terms of managing expectations within the relationship for the mentor and mentee. And just as a little interesting aside, every session that I've ever run on this, people have said that they're uncomfortable as mentors being a role model. And my counter argument to that is that we are all modelling our way, one way or another. So our behaviours, our values, our performance, one way or another, is an example of how to do things, for better or worse. So the role model thing is not about putting somebody on a pedestal and saying, yes, this is the perfect way to do things. It's about, it's much more subtle than that. So that's the role of the mentor. Any one of these things is valid, and different things might be more important to you at different times in the mentoring relationship. So at session 1, for example, a sounding board might be really important, and at session 4, being a critical friend might be really important. And then the role as a mentee, well, we know now that it's your job to be in the driving seat, so very much respecting the time and being committed to your learning are crucial factors in all of this. But obviously being incredibly honest in your thinking is vital for you to maximising the benefit of these conversations. being prepared for each session, and undertaking any tasks or any kind of little admin around when you meet up and how you meet up is making sure that you're in the driving seat here. But crucially, do make up your own mind. It's really important for you to be clear that you're in charge here. So I'd just like to hear a little bit from you guys now, and stop talking for a couple of seconds. What do you find challenging in the mentoring conversation? Is there anything that you're willing, I'm not going to read out names, don't worry, but is there anything that you find challenging in the mentoring conversation that we could just discuss here a little bit more? That would be useful for me to just use some of your personal thoughts about what you might find challenging. So somebody said, trying to drill down, let me just, trying to drill down on my objectives. Yeah, that's a really good observation. Thank you for posting that. So trying to drill down on objectives is a really important part of obviously the whole mentoring conversation, because you need to get specific, and you need to be really thorough in your thinking about what you want to achieve out of this. And you know, sometimes I use this example as a kind of an illustration. So somebody might come to me and say, well, I wouldn't say this because I'm not a sports coach, but they might say something like, I want to be a better swimmer. And the way of getting around that and starting to investigate it more deeply would say, I would want to say, well, okay, so what swim stroke do you want to get better at? What distance do you want to be able to do that stroke at? How long do you want to be able to swim that distance for? And by when do you want to have done that before? So is it front crawl? Is it 30 lengths in 15 minutes by February? You know, so it's helping people to really drill down on those objectives, those aims, those outcomes in a really thorough way. Now, that might unearth all kinds of other thinking or observations that might be useful for you to think about the realities of your situation, how much time you've got, how much annual leave you need to take, or what research grants need to be in by when. So that can be a factor in all of this, in unearthing some of this information around that. But equally, I would say about the drilling down on objectives, understanding what your personal preferences are. Are you a big thinker who's got lots of ideas and you need your mentor to really kind of help you find structure and focus in that? Or are you somebody who's already quite structured and focused in your thinking, and actually you need your mentor to open you up and to really help you stretch your thinking in different directions? Another question we've got here: as a mentor, would you push to talk about what you think the mentee is applying, holding back, or would you stay in the comfort zone of explicit dialogue? Well, I would always want to stretch and to ask further questions. So sometimes what people are actually saying verbally might actually be different to what they're physically saying. So somebody might actually be quite sort of tense and worried in their general demeanour, but actually be saying, yeah, things are going really well, and I've done this and I've done that, and I've achieved X, Y, and Z. And I would always personally, once I've built up trust and a good safe environment to work on, say, but is there anything else going on? Because you seem quite tense, or is there anything else that is worth us talking about here? I would want to investigate that safely a little bit more with people, because I think that's useful for people to have that safe environment, to have those additional stretches and questions posed to them. So here's something for you to think about as mentees: the key ingredients of a session. Well, I would argue it's always important to be prepared for the session. Now, again, you might be very prepared, organised person and have a little agenda that you've already emailed to your mentor and be, you know, thoroughly sort of organised in that kind of way. Equally, you might not be that kind of person, and you might actually not realise you know what you're thinking until you've turned up and you started talking. But I would argue for some sort of reflection and review before you get to the session, so that you're clear about what you'd like to get out of the conversation. Please try and find a place undisturbed. If you're doing this in somebody's office, then the chances are emails pinging into people's desktops or that little knock on the door with a "have you got 5 minutes" will happen. So if you can find a neutral spot, whether it be in you know, a separate meeting room or somewhere else that you feel as though that you are going to be undisturbed, I think that's really important. It helps you stay on track, helps you stay focused, because staying focused on your learning, of course, is the key point here as a mentee, is making sure that you're not just downloading everything that's happened, that you're actually focused on what you're doing, what your purpose is with this mentoring. So thinking through all that is going on and looking at it from all angles is really important. Do take in advice and guidance if you need it, and you might want to ask for that. You might want to say, well, have you done anything like this before, or what would you do? And that's fine, but that doesn't mean to say that you have to do that. You know, you do need to make up your own mind. So, you know, be thoughtful about what information you're taking on board. You can note it, but you don't have to do it. Do agree some actions to take forward. I think it's really important at the end of a conversation, a session, for you to be clear about what you're going to do between now and next time. And of course, do reflect on your learning. So they're the key ingredients, I think, to a session. So top tips, we're right at the end of the slide deck now. Coming up to some questions. So top tips for mentees: do identify a goal or an area to change, but also be mindful that that might evolve over time. So what you identify as a goal at the beginning of a relationship with a mentor quite genuinely might change over time, because your context change or your thinking change, and be open to that. Obviously value the sessions, and you know, if you've made that arrangement and that agreement, then you know, try and protect those sessions as best as you can. Do act on things between sessions, because actually that's when all of the learning really happens, and do reflect on your learning. I like to think of this as notice how you're doing things, notice how you're behaving, how you're interacting, how you're responding to different scenarios. That will give you some really powerful insights. But do pace yourself and recognise it takes time to embed the learning. It's not all going to become crystal clear in session one. And then if you're thinking about this from a mentor point of view, for me, as a modern developmental mentor, you should be giving up trying to fix it. And that should be a great blessing, because most of the time when we're working with people in a hierarchical situation, and they come to us, then we assume we've got to try and fix it or offer a solution in some way. And that's not necessarily the case. That's not necessarily the important factor in a mentoring conversation. Do give up doing any work. You shouldn't be taking away any actions here, mentors. It's for the mentee to take away any work. And also do give up your own agenda. It's not about you, it's about them. So make sure you stay focused on them. Give up focusing on the issues alone. It's easy, all too easy, to get sucked into the complexity and the detail of what's happened to this person since last time, and that particular email or that particular awful meeting. Try and maintain a bit of distance from that, so that you can mirror back things to the person that you're working with from that perspective and that distance. If you jump down too deeply into the detail, you also might get lost. And do give up rushing. This is a conversation that can be nice, evenly paced, for both of you, and you can relax within that. So here we are. We've got one more slide after this, just to give you some information about the Academy. But any questions that you've got for us that you'd like to ask at this point? What are we thinking, people? Anything that springs to mind? Okay. So I've got a question that's come up here. My mentoring sessions as a mentee are quite focused on my research. How do I shift the conversation to be more about my career development? Well, I think that don't make the assumption that because this is a mentoring relationship that's been set up probably through the Academy and therefore should have an emphasis on your research in that kind of way. Don't think that there isn't other topics, other themes, ideas that are equally valid, because your research is only one part of you. It's only one part of your life, and the totality of your life and your experience has an impact on your research. So don't assume that anything else is not valid. And I think this is the kind of conversation, a mentoring relationship, where you quite legitimately can talk about work-life balance, or difficult colleagues, or where you want to be in 5-10 years time, how you manage, you know, 2 young children. All of those things are legitimate things for you to be able to talk about in a mentoring conversation, because they all have an impact on that particular part of your working life. So, any other? Oh, here we go. We've got a question here. Just reading this through. So, academic mentor, very knowledgeable area about study, and is given great direction. Unfortunately, they don't treat you as an experienced adult learner. That's a shame, and it's quite patronising. Do you have any ways to get the best out of the meetings with mentors who are challenging to get on with? Great question. Thank you for that. So how do we cope with a mentor who has a different style and approach to what we need? I guess you have to ask yourself the question, have you got the platform of trust within this relationship to push back on what they're willing to give for you in a mentoring relationship? So this academic person, what did you call them, academic mentor, has probably got quite a hierarchical structured approach, and that's what I'm assuming here. Pardon me if I'm making that if I'm taking that the wrong way, but they've got quite a patronising, as you say, approach to mentoring, and that's good for only a small element of what you need. So have you got the clout, and have you got the ability to push back on that and say that you need something else? And have they got the ability to stretch and to give something else in that relationship? They might be just very, very comfortable. They might be in their comfort zone, just being the kind of wise sage who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and is willing to tell you how to get from A to B to C. And you might want to ultimately think about finding a mentor from another source who could give you a much broader and more modern developmental view of a mentoring conversation. But I would have to ask the question, in this particular case, how willing do you think your academic mentor is to stretch in another direction? Are they just doing this sort of hierarchical, patronising approach because that's what they're used to and that's what they think you want, and you know, it's their comfort zone? Or are they willing to try a different approach? And only you can sort of, I suppose, say whether that's likely or not. My own personal view is that perhaps sometimes people are set in their ways, and actually finding somebody who's got a slightly different approach, a more modern developmental approach, might be more useful to you at this point. Got another question here. Is there a risk that formal mentoring can become tokenistic? Yes, I suppose it can in some ways, because it's you know, fulfilling a kind of traditional idea of protege, and bringing people on and you know, helping people in a very systematic, this is how we do things, this is the system we follow, this is how it works in this university, or this is how it works in this specialty. And so we're sort of just going through the motions, really, in some ways. But I think if you get the relationship right, and if you have a relationship with somebody who has that independence and unbiased and non-judgmental approach to how they want to work with you, and you, if you like, contract with them fairly early on, well, at the beginning, to really set that culture of learning up between you, then you've got a really good chance of it not being tokenistic, in my opinion. I hope that answers that question. Okay, I can't see, oh, thank you. I can't see any other questions coming up, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up our last slide now, which gives you some Twitter and email and links to our website with lots more information, lots more events happening and opportunities perhaps for you to capitalise on. That's probably it from me. Lizzie, have you got anything else that you'd like to chip in with at this point?
I'd just like to say thank you to you, Alexis, and to everyone who's joined in, and I welcome people's emails to the mentoring email address. We'll answer any queries that you have if you think of anything after this webinar.
Okay, well, it's just for me to say then thank you very much for your contribution. I hope you've enjoyed the information that we've shared with you this morning. All the very best with how you move forward with whatever mentoring relationship you have and whatever role you have in that mentoring relationship. But I'm sure Lizzie will be able to share the slides with you after the session, and all the very best with your mentoring relationships. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.